Ever binge watch like a crime drama and then, catch yourself thinking, man, what's it really like to be a criminologist? Well, you're in the right spot. Today we're going to do a deep dive into, well, criminology going way beyond the usual handcuffs and crime scenes.
Hmm.
We're trying to figure out what these guys actually do. And our main source for this, RoleCatcher. They've got a ton of career insights.
Yeah, and what I find super interesting is how RoleCatcher really hits on the human side of this whole thing. Like, we're not just talking about some dry statistics or case files, but really getting into the people and all the things that actually cause crime in the first place.
It's like, okay, we get it. Criminologists study crime, duh. But RoleCatcher shows how they actually figure out the why behind it all. It's more than just a suspect's rap sheet.
Exactly. They're digging into someone's background for sure, but also looking at the bigger picture, social stuff, psychology, even the environment.
So it's less about one crime one time and more about patterns, right?
Think of it this way. They might be looking at, say, a crime scene, but they're also trying to see if that connects to citywide crime data. Is this one robbery part of a trend? It's about connecting those dots.
Okay, that's making more sense. But let's say someone listening is actually thinking, hey, I want to be a criminologist. What's that actually look like day to day? Because RoleCatcher makes it clear it's not just one kind of job.
Oh, absolutely. You could be working directly with, like, the police in a government agency, or maybe you're at a research place crunching numbers and writing studies.
Totally different vibes.
And don't forget, universities. Some criminologists are teaching the next generation. So yeah, it's diverse.
But each one probably comes with its own, headaches. I'd guess working for the government involves a lot more bureaucracy than being a researcher.
You're not wrong. Government means red tape. Research is more freedom. But no matter where you end up, RoleCatcher makes a really good point that people don't always think about: the emotional toll.
Yeah, that's a thing you never see on TV, right? Like, what kind of situations are we talking about specifically?
Imagine you're called in on a case,
Yeah.
right? Series of home invasions, and they're violent. So you're the criminologist. You're the one poring over all these awful details, trying to get inside this criminal's head. But the whole time, there are real families out there terrified. It takes a certain kind of person to handle that, day after day.
And that's just one example. Makes you wonder how they deal with that emotionally, what kind of support they have. But okay, we've talked about the where of working in criminology, but what about the how? What skills do you need to actually make IT as a criminologist?
And that's where it gets interesting, because it's not all like magnifying glass and deerstalker hat. You know, you're not Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, RoleCatcher definitely busted that myth for me.
Observation helps, but they highlight other stuff that's huge EE. Critical thinking, you got to connect those dots. And data analysis, I mean, you're practically a
Well,
scientist.
it's more spreadsheets than magnifying glass these days, I bet. But you need those skills, or else how do you understand the data, do the research, all that?
And don't forget communicating what you find. RoleCatcher's big on that too. Reports, presentations, maybe even court. You can't just have the answers. You got to make everyone else understand them.
Makes sense. So what kind of data are you talking about? Specifically, give us the rundown.
Oh, it's all kinds. You've got your crime stats, obviously, but also police reports, demographics, even geographic stuff like mapping where things happen. Gives them a much clearer picture of what's going on.
So we went from magnifying glass to like mapping software pretty quick. That's wild.
And get this, RoleCatcher pointed out, the criminologists come from all sorts of backgrounds. It's not just criminal justice majors, which you might expect.
Really? I would thought that was like the most obvious path.
You'd see some, sure, but there's folks with degrees in sociology, psychology, even law. Makes sense when you think about it.
Because at the end of the day, it's about people, right?
Exactly. Criminology is about understanding why people do what they do, but within, like, society.
Yeah.
How does it all fit together? Very interdisciplinary, if you want to get fancy about it.
Love it when we get fancy. But let's say you've got the skills, you're fired up to actually do this job, make a difference. What's the career ladder look like?
Well, RoleCatcher did a nice job laying it all out, from entry level to, like, the big boss roles.
Yeah, like what's the top? Director of criminology, something like that?
Something like that.
Yeah.
But you're probably starting as a research assistant, helping out the senior folks, gathering data. Then as you get more experience, you move up designing studies, maybe even working with law enforcement directly.
So there's room to grow, find your niche. Nobody wants to be stuck doing the same thing forever.
And at the higher levels, that's where you can have a bigger impact. Advising politicians on policy, leading research teams, even being an expert witness. High-stakes stuff.
Talk about a real-world impact. That's what I love to hear, which is a perfect transition to what I want to dig into next. So we've talked about how criminologists work, like the nuts and bolts, but RoleCatcher also got into how tech is changing things, especially in law enforcement. And that kind of makes me wonder, what happens to the human element when it's AI and big data calling the shots? Where does a criminologist fit into that future?
Man, that's the question, isn't it? Anyone who's serious about this field, they got to be thinking about this stuff.
Because it's already happening, right? I mean, we've got AI analyzing crime scenes, making predictions about criminals. It's not that big a leap to imagine it getting even more powerful.
Oh, absolutely. And that's where the criminologist is even more important, I'd argue.
Really? How so? You'd think the AI would just, like, take over.
Think about it. AI gives you data, predictions, sure, but someone's got to make sense of it all. Is the algorithm biased? What's the human side of the story that the data doesn't show? That's the criminologist's job.
So instead of being replaced, they're more like translating, bridging the gap between the numbers and what's actually going on.
Exactly. You might even see them like working on crime prevention in the metaverse
Hmm.
or figuring out the ethics of AI surveillance. It's a whole new world of crime fighting.
My head is spinning. We went from old school detective work to, like, sci-fi in a few minutes. But I guess what we've learned is that criminology is about more than just catching the bad guy. It's about understanding people, using data to make a real difference, and always being ready for what's next.
Couldn't have put it better myself. This is a field where you need critical thinking, strong ethics, and you got to know people. Those things are only going to get more important.
So true. And on that note, we'll leave you with this. If you could ask a criminologist of the future anything, what would it be? What mysteries about crime would you want them to solve? Keep those brain gears turning, because the deep dive never really ends.